So I just observed these coots, which could be a pair, possibly this one and this one. I'm not very good at determining coot gender by glance yet, but I just observed them in combat. And there were three, this one, that one, and one that is now far off to the left of the scene. And they were having combat with feet, so they were doing a lot of flapping, leaning back and sort of clawing in the water. It was very intense. These two seem to be aggressing another one. And when they were done, there's all kinds of interesting behavior, like this rock standing, which both of these birds did, that I haven't seen coots doing before. And a lot of shaking and preening, which is all, makes sense. Because animals often have situations where they're, after an intense stimulus, they will shake it off. And so they'll shake their whole bodies. And there's lots of things going on that I can't understand because I just don't have the perspective necessary to understand them. But there's also a lot of things going on that I can understand. The shaking it off and preening behavior. One coot came over after the combat to do what appeared to be consolation, to console the coot that was being aggressed. This coot here is essentially perceiving itself as the victor, apparently, as far as I can tell. Anyway, there was really a lot of interesting stuff going on. Now, for me, I'm sensitive to violence. So, for me, it's emotionally charged when I see creatures doing this, and I'm likely to want to intervene and stuff. Though I don't always. I don't always intervene. Now this coot's now making a beeline pretty much for some other relational opportunity. And here's the coot that was with it previously over here. And this is, of course, the great blue heron nesting tree. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 9 to 12 nests in that tree. We're here at Stow Lake. It's sunset, and in this tree, red-tailed hawks often rear their young. And I just wanted to talk briefly about what was going on with these coots. Because there's a weird situation. There's all kinds of really interesting situations, actually. But over here is the pair that one of them had been involved, I believe. And one of the things that happens when there's aggression on the lake here is that it's contagious, right? It spreads. A bird who was lost, essentially, who did not prevail in an aggression, may immediately go to some other bird and aggress it in order to retrieve something like social face or internal. It's attempting to recohere internally in some way. And this is a behavior that I've seen related aspects of in human beings. Most social animals, and we don't usually necessarily think of ducks and birds as social animals, but they are. They have social identities and roles. And when those are threatened, once again, we're seeing the rock standing behavior by, I think, the same pair. And they're both going to do it. Now, they could easily get out of the water. These rocks are more accessible than getting out of the water, but I think there's something significant about standing high in the midst of the water, is my guess here. But yeah, emotions are contagious. They spread, and they don't just spread by themselves, they are spread by specific players or agents in a social situation. And so they're not just like an invisible germ or something like that. They're a behavioral contagion, right? And ideas are very similar to this. And so are opinions and beliefs and all this stuff. So I find it fascinating to watch how social, emotional qualities can become socially communicated rapidly in natural situations and in artificial situations, such as jobs and corporations and advertising and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so on. Yeah. This is the opposite of a context like that. Even though this lake was made by humans, it's a place of living water now. But we are all very sensitive. We're very sensitive to the relationship between our public presentation and our interiority, our private experience and thought and feeling. And it's important for us to understand how complex this is for beings like ourselves. And it's also important for us to have tools with which we can work with the challenges that we face in the social and relational contexts in which we participate and have roles, or from which we are excluded, rejected, and so on. Particularly those social contexts where we've experienced aggression. It's very, very difficult it can be very difficult to recohere, to return to balance after an incident of where we've experienced aggression or rejection or judgment. And these birds have anciently evolved tools for that involve shaking, preening. Okay, so now what's going on is the two pairs that were previously in conflict. Yep, there we go. Okay, they're already making displays. They're coming back together, and you can see that we're re-instancing the conflict that originally started all this. Yeah, it's not over yet. These birds aren't done fighting. Except now, instead of, and I believe these are two couples, right? And this could have to do with the fact that it's the onset of mating season. This bird over here is probably the female of the bird that was previously attacked. And I think a couple is attacking one bird here. So we're seeing actually a very courageous bird, because the bird that's being primarily aggressed has two opponents. And its probable mate, or at least friend, is standing off to the left. And this is a replay of what happened previously. And you can kind of see that one of the birds has two opponents. They're locking legs. There's definitely a hierarchical display going on. They're establishing social and relational hierarchies via combat. This is something humans do too. But most of the time, in nature, the combat's relatively, there's a lot of show and not a lot of blood, right? It's mostly display. Although this is pretty intense. And it's interesting that while I've been, discussing the previous version of this conflict, it just started up again. And I can't be sure whether or not my presence has any effect on that, but you can see, or I can see actually, there's a variety of displays going on. The birds lean forward, they show their tails just prior to getting back into the attack. But my main point is that this kind of behavior is contagious, right? It spreads to other birds. It can spread to other kinds of birds. After this combat occurred last time, one of the males aggressed incoming mallards, which is not particularly common for coots. A mallard's a much larger bird. Some mallards came up and one of the males ran up and aggressed them. Okay, so the female or the other friend is rushing over. It's got the back feathers lifted into making themselves look larger. There's another coot arriving now that's interested from the far left that isn't in the scene. The calls from that associated coot and the raised wings. Yep, here we go. This is contagion. Now we're seeing it. Other birds are coming over to get involved. Birds that were not involved in the previous conflict. And it's not because they've got a bone to pick. It's almost that the emotions are contagious. And the calls communicate the emotions, right? This is a very, very sophisticated social phenomenon going on here. It's not just some bird is angry at another bird, or there was a territorial dispute or a mating dispute. It's very sophisticated. This conflict could have origins in previous days, previous weeks, previous encounters, or not. But mainly what I want to talk about is just the surprising nature of the communicability of intense emotions. A bird that's been aggressed in one place may immediately go off and aggress some other bird. And I saw behavior like this in elementary school when I was a child among humans. Of course, tonight we've got a big scene going on. Conor McGregor, a fighting celebrity, is going to be in combat. This isn't the kind of thing I would normally pay attention to, but hundreds of thousands or millions of people will watch to see who comes out on top, quote unquote, in an organized combat where the combatants are primarily fighting for a prize rather than because they have, because there's an actual conflict between them. So us humans, we invent conflicts, televise them, turn them into commodities. Millions of people watch them. And maybe that's a method for us to create equilibrium that might otherwise dissolve under the pressures of our artificial and bizarre supercultures. Maybe that's one of the ways that we try to maintain order in a situation where our social and personal identities are constantly at risk of judgment or aggression or rejection. And perhaps we're even at risk of celebration, because to be celebrated by a fake culture isn't exactly a benefit, right? It's not always just a benefit. It can get you killed. It can ruin your life. Everybody wants to be rich, but to win the lottery can destroy your world. Because the contexts, well, partly due to the fact that the contexts that we exist in are so, what's the right word? Well, they're so superficial, they're so irreal or surreal. And there's lots of other reasons why that phenomenon happens. People who suddenly acquire huge amounts of wealth after having been relatively poor their whole lives are not exactly in a position to understand how to make that work. So yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to share with you what's going on in the evening tonight at Stow Lake, and some of my reflections on the communicability of social and relational emotions in social animals, like not entirely unlike ourselves, however seemingly different they may appear.